Julie, also known as Buskin, is a passionate young woman who lived in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, in 1996. Born and raised in Benton, Arkansas, she moved to Oklahoma to attend the University of Oklahoma. Here, Julie worked on the school's golf course and pursued her passion for dance with the dream of becoming a great ballet dancer. She is on track to earn her bachelor's degree in dance and dreams of opening a children's studio after graduation. Her outstanding talent and friendly personality have made Julie popular, with many friends among the students. On December 19, 1996, Julie had a meaningful evening with Ryan James, her friend and colleague from the golf course, at his grandparents' house. After a cozy dinner and movie, they even planned lunch the next day. Julie stayed until about 10 p.m. before heading out to play Monopoly and exchange Christmas presents at a friend's house. Even though she knew that her college semester had just ended and she would return home the next day, the moment of parting was still one of urgency and appreciation. Julie then promised her roommate Megan that she would drive Megan to Will Rogers Airport at 5 the following day. Megan, however, decided to stay up all night. The two left their friend's house and drove to a small restaurant called The Kettle around 2 a.m. After dinner, they stopped at a gas station to shop, enjoyed a cappuccino, and returned to the apartment just after 3 a.m. to pick up Megan's things. They soon left for the airport around 4:30 a.m. It took Megan about 30 minutes to get there, and when she was dropped off, she watched as Julie drove away in her Red Eagle Summit around 5:30 a.m. In the Dublin West apartment building where Julie lived, the quiet night air was suddenly filled with terrifying screams. Several residents heard a woman screaming, prompting one of them to call 911 and report, "We were just sleeping, and my wife heard a creepy sound coming from the parking lot." However, no one witnessed any explicit images. Hours later, Ryan James arrived at Julie's apartment as scheduled to meet her for lunch, but Julie did not show up, and her car was gone. Ryan immediately reported her missing. Not long after, Julie's parents drove from Arkansas to look for their daughter, but they were told that Julie had been missing for 12 hours. The tragedy was compounded when Julie's body, or Buskin, was discovered on the shore of a lake about 15 miles from the apartment. The gruesome scene showed her hands tied with shoelaces and her body from the waist up submerged in water. She had been shot once, an executioner's bullet wound to the back of her head, along with signs that she had been attacked at the lake's edge. Investigators found key evidence in the surrounding sand, including 2 sets of footprints, one belonging to Julie and the other, which, after comparing it to a size 9 men's Nike shoe, police believe were those of the perpetrator. Right next to Julie's body, just 20 feet away, investigators discovered a pair of Nike Air 2 running shoes, a crucial early clue. They also found a pink jumpsuit, worn and wrinkled, with the initials JB printed on the label, Julie's own. Even more remarkable was that the jumpsuit contained traces of male DNA, carefully preserved for analysis as DNA technology improved. An autopsy later confirmed that Julie had been shot with a .22 caliber bullet, and the type of gun used in the crime was quite unusual, but the details would be revealed later. Julie Buskin had a vast network of friends at the university, leading investigators to hope that any of them could provide helpful information. However, no one had openly expressed anger or discord toward Julie. She left no trace of breakups or feuds. Julie's apartment was found in perfect condition with no signs of a struggle, while her car was discovered in an apartment complex just a block away. The red sand on the floor of the car looked exactly like the red sand on the shore of the lake where Julie's body was found. A puzzle for investigators. Why would someone abduct Julie, kill her by the lake, and then return the car almost at the scene of the abduction? Disappointingly, no hairs or strange fingerprints were found inside the car, nor was there any evidence of a struggle. Julie's phone was also missing, forcing investigators to collect her cell phone records. Records showed that after her death, she had made 2 calls, one to ask about the weather forecast and another to a number not in service at the time. The case remained cold and unsolved despite a series of tips and a $70,000 reward. Just a month after Julie's disappearance, a man called the police, claiming that on the night of Julie's abduction, he had seen a car identical to hers pull out in front of him, almost hitting him, near the lake. Not stopping there, the witness followed the vehicle for about 5 miles to confront the driver. During that time, the driver kept glancing in his rearview mirror before speeding away, and the witness was lucky enough to catch a glimpse of the man's face. His description was then passed on to investigators, leading to the release of a composite sketch of the young man. Possibly a college student, Hispanic, with long black hair and a muscular build, which was circulated repeatedly in search of any clues to the suspect's identity. Local Oklahoma media did not recognize his name, and the case seemed cold for 4.5 years. During that time, police received a letter from a female inmate at the Oklahoma County Jail, suggesting that a former acquaintance of hers, Dennis Sturmer, 23, a construction worker with no criminal record, may have killed Julie. Sturmer, who lived just 4 blocks from Julie's apartment and bore a striking resemblance to the composite sketch, refused to answer any questions or provide a DNA sample. Forced to obtain a court order to collect DNA, the results showed that Sturmer's DNA was very, very similar to that from the jumpsuit at the scene, but not an exact match. He was no longer considered a suspect. The initial theory was that Sturmer's only living male relative, his brother, might have been the culprit. However, when the brother's DNA was compared, the results were not a match, leaving the case at a standstill after 5 long years of uncertainty. It was heartbreaking for Julie's parents to accept the possibility that they might not live long enough to see justice served. Unwilling to accept such an outcome, investigators set out to collect DNA from more than 200 men who had come into contact with Julie, but none returned, making it seem like the case would never be solved. 6 years after Julie's death, a surprising twist occurred when a man named Anthony Castillo Sanchez was arrested for assaulting his girlfriend. After his arrest, Sanchez was forced to provide a DNA sample to law enforcement. Investigators quickly discovered some interesting details about Sanchez. He lived just a mile from Julie's apartment, and a girlfriend of his shared a diary during the month that Julie died. In her diary, she noted that Anthony had bought her a pair of Nike running shoes and had also bought himself a pair, a size 9, which matched the one found at the scene. What was even more intriguing was that one of Anthony's exes had a cell phone number that was just 1 digit off from the number dialed on Julie's phone after her death, suggesting that Sanchez had tried to contact her ex but missed the number by 1 digit. Additionally, Sanchez's father had an unusual habit of firing a .22 caliber gun into the interior wall of their rented home. Investigators recovered a bullet from it and determined that it came from the same gun that had shot Julie, a gun from one of 6 manufacturers with distinctive grooves found on the bullets. Finally, in 2004, Anthony Sanchez's DNA was compared to a male DNA sample collected from Julie's jumpsuit, and it was a perfect match. It is worth noting that Sanchez was only 18 years old at the time of the crime, opening up a surprising twist to the long deadlocked case. If he had called Julie's number, he would have been arrested immediately. Anthony Castillo Sanchez's story becomes even more paradoxical. Convicted in 2006, the man was determined to pay with his own life. As of March 2023, Sanchez is still appealing the sentence, claiming that the crime was not his but his father's. His father, Glenn Sanchez, committed suicide in April 2022 and confided to his girlfriend that he was the one who committed the crime in the first place. Investigators looked into the possibility that the DNA sample collected might belong to Glenn Sanchez. Still, the odds of a match were too low to be a coincidence. Just 1 in 200 trillion for whites, 1 in 20 trillion for African Americans, and 1 in 185 billion for Hispanics. 94 trillion for Hispanics, according to court documents. As a result, Anthony Sanchez is scheduled to be executed on September 21, 2023. Murfreesboro, Tennessee, the historic site of the Civil War's legendary Battle of Stones River, has become a vibrant destination thanks to its rapid development and the presence of a prestigious university. However, beneath the glitzy surface, a tragedy occurred on May 31, 1984, shocking the entire community. On his way home that day, a local farmer unexpectedly discovered clothing scattered across a field. Curious, he approached and found the body of a girl. The victim was wearing only a bra, covered by 2 pairs of jeans, one of which was hers and the other had a male mark. A dark jacket with sleeves wrapped around the neck was also found, as if trying to keep some warmth in the storm of crime. Investigators quickly identified the victim as Laura Salmon, 18, born October 6, 1965, in Tennessee. At the time, Laura was a Middle Tennessee State University student in Murfreesboro and worked as a cashier at a Kroger grocery store. An autopsy revealed that Laura had died from blunt force trauma to the head, with signs of being hit up to 10 times with rocks found nearby, blood on their surfaces adding to the brutality of the incident. In addition to the injuries sustained from the assault, the medical examiner noted that Laura had had sex with someone within 24 to 48 hours before the tragedy, though there were no apparent signs of rape. One of the most telling clues was a pair of men's jeans found next to the body, on which the male DNA was found to be inconsistent with that of Laura's previous lover. Although DNA testing is still in its early stages, the evidence from the jeans has opened up a new line of inquiry as investigators attempt to piece together a timeline of events from that fateful day. Records show that Laura began her day at work at Kroger, leaving around 1 p.m., and then had an appointment at Middle Tennessee State University to check her grades and meet with office staff. Her next plan was swimming at her grandmother's house, but she never arrived. Additionally, Laura's car was found miles away from the scene of the body. There were no fingerprints that didn't belong to her inside, but an unfamiliar hair was found inside, along with crucial DNA evidence. FBI lab investigators also found dirt in the tire wells consistent with the car having driven close to the crime scene, as if the killer had driven Laura's car back to her workplace. Clues added to the mystery when witnesses said that the night before the tragedy, they saw Laura being taken to a local nightclub and dancing with an unidentified young man, whose whereabouts remain a mystery to the investigation. This heartbreaking story remains a dark anecdote of Murfreesboro, a reminder that behind the city's growth and glory, dark mysteries remain unsolved. Laura's body was found in an area known for its drug addicts, college students who frequented the area to party, have bonfires, and enjoy the night. It was later theorized that, shortly after her shift at the nightclub, Laura met a stranger and went with him to Lover's Lane, where she rejected his advances. He committed suicide shortly afterward. Investigators initially suspected that the man was Laura's high school boyfriend, David Kyle Gilley, who was known for his jealous streak. However, David's stepfather's alibi claimed that he had been home all day, quickly eliminating him from the list of suspects. Not stopping there, another tip came from a woman in Nashville, Tennessee, who said she had been attacked by a man named John Taylor and threatened to do the same thing to Laura. When questioned, Taylor denied the attack and denied any contact with Laura. Background checks showed that Taylor not only attended the same school as Laura, but was also a member of the same Olympus Athletic Club and Spa, attended fraternity functions, and was recorded near campus on the day Laura died. His history of violence against his girlfriend further raised suspicions of his involvement. In a significant development, the FBI was asked to compare a sample of Taylor's hair to a foreign hair found in Laura's car. The FBI report showed that the hair matched John Taylor's. However, the mitochondrial DNA test, which is likely to belong to about 20% of the population, was not conclusive enough to convict him. And other evidence did not directly link Taylor to the crime scene or confirm that he was with Laura that fateful day. Finally, a small but essential detail added to the mystery. The men's jeans found at the scene had a 36-inch inseam and a 30-inch waist, while Taylor was a petite guy, and these jeans were entirely inappropriate. These final pieces of the puzzle suggest that, although the case initially seemed to be closed, many unanswered questions remain. Laura's mother, Laureen Mackay, stood at her daughter's grave and promised she would bring justice for Laura. That promise kept her going, even though she didn't know where to start. Finally, years later, help arrived. Dan Goodwin, a friend of Laura's at Middle Tennessee State University, went to the movies with Laura on May 27, 1984, just days before she died. During Laura's funeral, Dan promised her mother that he would find the killer. After graduating, Dan worked as a reporter for the Daily News Journal in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and became a cold case reporter. In 1987, one of the cases he covered was Laura's death. Dan quickly realized that he wanted to write about these cases and get involved in the investigation. A few years later, Dan left journalism to become a police officer. His first case was that of Laura Salmons. One of Dan's first big decisions was to send all the evidence from the case to the forensics lab, hoping for breakthroughs in DNA technology that had come a long way in the years since. In 45 seconds. There was no choice but to move on to other suspects. Over the years, investigators had examined over 100 suspects, but none had come up. Laura's mother, Laureen Mackey, had sworn that she would see to it that justice was served at her daughter's grave. Although she didn't know exactly how she would keep that promise, Laureen was determined to make it the last act she could do for Laura. Years later, help finally came in the form of Dan Goodwin, Laura's close friend from college. Dan had had a few pleasant meetings with Laura just a few nights before she died. During a conversation, Dan asked Laura if she wanted to go to the movies, and they went to the theater together on May 27, 1984, to see a matinee screening of Natural starring Robert Redford. At Laura's funeral, Dan promised her mother that after graduation he would do his best to find the killer. Dan then began his career as a reporter at the Daily News Journal in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where he quickly became a cold case reporter. 1987. Dan wrote about a series of cold cases, including Laura's. Realizing that his passion for investigating was more than just journalism, he left journalism a few years later and joined the police force. His first cold case was Laura's. One of Dan's decisive steps was to send all the evidence back to the forensic lab to be tested with advanced DNA technology, opening up new hope for a case stalled for years. As the investigation continued, Dan followed up on any remaining leads. One particular lead came from an Oakland high school student in 2000 who revealed that his father, David Patterson, who had a history of aggravated assault, had taken the life of a girl in 1984 and left her body. However, when Dan tried to contact Patterson to learn more, he was told that Patterson had been shot and killed long ago, making the lead tragic but not deterring Dan's resolve. In a new line of investigation, authorities collected DNA samples from Patterson's children and compared them to the DNA of the male found at the crime scene. The results showed that the two samples did not match, forcing Patterson to be eliminated as a suspect. Dan then turned to John Taylor, another original suspect, but his DNA did not match the crime scene sample either. Dan even provided a DNA sample of himself to eliminate all suspicion, proving that he had no connection to the case. Finally, Dan turned his attention to a character who had never been considered in the initial investigation, a person whose name had intrigued him, David. Gilly, as mentioned, was Laura's high school boyfriend, a year younger than her. He was initially ruled out as a suspect based on the alibi provided by her stepfather, Dan. However, a witness bravely came wholly forward and denied that evidence. This person claimed to have seen David Gilly driving Laura's car on the day her body was discovered, not far from the road leading to the area where she was found. According to the witness, David's eyes were lifeless, staring straight ahead, which she identified from a series of photos in Laura's car. Dan also did not miss the signs of David's violent tendencies towards the women in his life, including Laura Salmon. According to her account, David would often get angry, grab her by the head, slam her head into the car, the school locker, or any nearby object, and once punched her so hard that he knocked out 2 of her front teeth. Dan couldn't believe that, with all that evidence, David Gilly was so quickly ruled out in the early stages of the investigation. David was about 6 feet 2 inches tall, and the men's jeans found at the scene fit him perfectly. To further investigate the clues, Dan enlisted the help of Jerry Finley, a crime scene reconstruction expert. Jerry discovered tiny drops of blood on the jeans, a type of medium-velocity splatter that occurs when someone is hit with a blunt object like a rock. Most of the blood was concentrated just above the knees, indicating that the perpetrator had been kneeling on the ground when he attacked Laura with the rock. Although investigators initially believed that the jeans belonged to the man who took Laura's life, DNA testing confirmed that the blood on them belonged to Laura herself. This further raised suspicions about David Gilley, whom Dan later tracked down in Florida to confront. At the time, David Gilley, who had gone through 2 divorces and worked for the Manatee County Department of Public Works, was not surprised when his criminal record was mentioned. Gilley had been arrested for trespassing and resisting arrest. When questioned by Dan, he again denied involvement and insisted that he was not responsible for what happened to Laura. In a strange turn of events, when investigators said they believed the owner of the jeans at the scene was the culprit, Gilley suddenly admitted that the jeans could be his. He immediately asked for a lawyer. Then, on May 31, 2000, authorities took a saliva sample from David Gilley. DNA testing proved that Gilley was the donor of the DNA found at the crime scene, confirming his role in bringing Laura's life. On the 16th anniversary of the murder, eventually David Gilley was arrested and brought to trial. Dan the man, kept his promise to help Laura's mother, who had sworn to her daughter that he would see justice done. The crime was motivated by jealousy. If Gilley couldn't have Laura, then no one else could. He kept tabs on Laura, disapproving of her making new friends at university. Although Laura's mother tried to convince her daughter to get a restraining order against Gilley, fear prevented her from doing so. According to the investigation, there were signs that Gilley lured Laura away to a secluded spot, Lover's Lane, where he repeatedly hit her with a rock after discovering blood on his jeans. Gilley removed the pants, left them at the scene, and drove Laura's car to her workplace. The vehicle was later discovered in September 2006. During the trial, Gilley's defense claimed that the presence of another man's DNA at the scene was evidence that someone else had been present. However, the jury never believed that any DNA other than Gilley's could be that of the perpetrator. Ultimately, Gilley was convicted on all charges and sentenced to life in prison.